Greetings and salutations. I'd like to welcome everyone to another meeting of a Design for Living Big Book study with Elizabeth and Bill. We are here today. We have been through the book. We finished up last week on page 164, which was the end of the main text. And there's a few things in the back of the book that are somewhat important. We'd like to go over those. And those are some of the appendices. We'll be starting with the AA tradition on page 561, because maybe even more importantly than the 12 steps is the 12 traditions, because in one of our readings, Bill said most of us could not recover if there wasn't a group. So it's easy to get in touch with the power by taking the steps, but if I have no one to pass it on to, we will wither and die. It's paramount, it's critical that we're there for the next alcoholic, because he needs us as much as we need him. Elizabeth, you want to start, or you want me to read and you'll comment, or however you want to do it, my dear?
I can read. So this covers, we're on 561. Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm an alcoholic, and glad to be with you guys today. We're on page 561, Appendix 1, the AA tradition. To those now in its fold, Alcoholics Anonymous has made the difference between misery and sobriety, and often the difference between life and death. AA can, of course, mean just as much to uncounted alcoholics not yet reached. Therefore, no society of men and women ever had a more urgent need for continuous effectiveness and permanent unity. We alcoholics see that we must work together and hang together, else most of us will finally die alone. The 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous are, we AAs believe, the best answers that our experience has yet given to those ever urgent questions. How can AA best function? And how can AA best stay whole and so survive? On the next page, AA's 12 traditions are seen in their so-called short form, the form in general used today. There is a condensed version of the original long form AA traditions as first printed in 1946. Because the long form is more explicit and of possible historic value, it is also reproduced. Go ahead, Bill.
I'm just going to say one thing that came to mind. So we alcoholics see that we must work together, hang together, else most of us will finally die alone. And it talks about the more urgent need for continuing effectiveness and permanent unity. And how divisive are we when we get here? I'm at odds with the world. I'm at odds with this thing called this God. I'm at odds with myself. And now you tell me that I'm going to get along with a whole bunch of people just like me. What a gift and what a divine design to say that the very thing that I must do to survive is my path to the power. If I can get out of self by helping someone else, God can do what he's been trying to do for me all my life, but I keep standing in the way. What a gift. The very thing that saves us, sets us free. Okay, I'm done. Thank you for that.
Do we want to read them all out?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to say that I used to think the traditions were for the people that went to the business meeting, and for years I didn't have time to go. I had little kids, I had a lot going on. I've learned so much more. Or those, I kind of always would sort of cringe a bit when they do those, oh, let's apply the 12 traditions to all of our relationships. I was like, oh, great. But I really have learned in the past few years being in service in AA, because I have time to do that now. My kids are grown, and so I've devoted myself a lot to AA service. How really important, the overriding principle of all the traditions is unity. And it's so important. And like Bill said, we come in here, we're only thinking about ourselves. That's the disease. That's not recovery. To help, people understand you're now part of something bigger. And when you really get into sponsoring and you're on the front lines with newcomers, and you see who makes it and who doesn't, and the people that aren't here for the right reasons, that don't care about the thing that they're part of, they usually don't make it anyway. But it's really hard, I have found, for especially, people-pleasing, well-meaning alcoholics to not be as concerned with group welfare, because some people want to save everybody. whether they're here for the right reasons or not. And I don't mean I mean, they're not showing any interest in what AA recovery has to offer at all. We've had those, right, where they just want to complain and they're not getting better at all. And then they can really affect a group. So in some cases, it's really important to know what is meant by unity and especially tradition one. And I've experienced watching a group membership completely change over the course of about 8 months. Because these principles were not upheld, and there are 12 of the 36 principles. And if I'm not solid on my first 12, I'm probably not going to be very good at the next 12, Anyway, so I'll read some of the traditions. On page 562, the 12 traditions. I need my glasses for these. 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity, which I just talked about. 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. And a group conscience is the whole group, not just a few members of it. I've learned very well not to make decisions on my own without going to my group. 3, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. I think I love the long version of tradition 3, which we'll get to. 4, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 5, each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Do we want to speak on each tradition or do we want to talk at the end?
Now, why don't we do the first 6 and bring up some highlights, because there's a couple things I thought of immediately and I don't want to get to the end and forget them.
Awesome. 6, an AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, you said something important, and it's easy to do. It's easy to get to the point where we get to determine, or at least we think we get to determine, who's here for the right reason. And when you said that, I thought, I don't even know. Does any of us really know why we're in AA? We certainly didn't come for what we got. I remember a guy came into a meeting and he said, I'm here to get my wife back. I said, sir, I'm sure we don't have her. I understand what he was saying. He didn't know that he was coming here. But we got to keep in mind that in chapter 4, it says something very powerful. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood right now in this moment in time by a certain kind of faith. I don't know if anyone can explain to me what Alcoholics Anonymous is. We read a preamble, but that barely touches the surface of what takes place here. I come here thinking you're going to treat my drinking problem. A lot of people come here to learn how to drink. They find out that's not what we teach here. But what are we really doing here? And then all of a sudden, I think I'm here for abstinence and sobriety and recovery. And what happens is, if I follow the instructions in the book and awaken spiritually, I find out that Alcoholics Anonymous had nothing to do with the steps, the book, the name of our fellowship. All 3 of those are called Alcoholics Anonymous. But what I discover is Alcoholics Anonymous, although is all 3 of those, is none of those, that Alcoholics Anonymous is spirit. And I've been led here, saved, without my consent, without my knowledge, by something that loves me more than I could possibly ever love myself. And I don't understand that. So I came here to get out of trouble legally, financially, maritally, employment. And I found out that none of those things were my problem, nor was drinking. So it's important that we get along. I think that God demonstrates himself, and over time, I think he shows up and shows off, although he remains more anonymous as he does. And some of us actually take the credit for his handiwork. And being a gentleman, he just lets us take the bow. Isn't that amazing? The only requirement is the desire. In the first edition preamble, it says honest desire. They took that away because what alcoholic come in here can be honest. All you got to do is want to quit. Just have a desire. We'll do the rest. Autonomous, we get to do what we want, provided we don't hurt anyone else. These traditions, the more you think about it, once you get this working, not, I don't want to say knowledge, working knowledge of the steps, in my estimation, is a big book in your hand. But when you're working these steps or have worked them and had this awakening, I can take these 12 traditions and apply them to my home life, my work life, my social life, all the lives that any life run on self will destroy, can't be successful. These will show me how to better see if I'm united in my marriage, if I'm united with my family, there's no division. The kids aren't running away at 14. They want to come home and discuss what's going on because they feel safe. If there's an ultimate authority that's guiding and governing, it's one of love, not of fear, not of recrimination, not of punishment. The only requirement to be in this family, right, is a desire to be in the family. No big deal. You got to stay in the marriage, you got to desire it. And autonomous, which means the neighbors can do what they want. They can have feasts on Friday night if they believe that that's their religious observation. And we can have steak, and it's okay. We don't have to get involved with that outside opinion. We have one primary purpose: to love and serve. That's the primary purpose. We call it a little something different when it comes to the drinking and the alcoholism, but that's ultimately what it is. And what we do is we don't get involved. We don't affiliate with anything else. We have a common bond here. I don't get involved with your wife, and please don't get involved with mine. Elizabeth, 1 through 6 wrapped up in Bill Swan's nutshell.
Well, I love the long form of tradition 3 because it does talk about all who suffer from alcoholism. So, because we have a lot of people here with other conditions, and that's fine as long as you also want to stop drinking because you're an alcoholic and you wish to recover from alcoholism. So I think that's important to know, because we do often get people who play amateur therapist and doctor and all kinds of stuff, and that's really dangerous. And I like, on tradition 6, we cooperate, we don't affiliate. And I know people who say it's good for us to know people in other fellowships and in other places so we can help alcoholics get other help, but let them know that that's where they get it, those other places. Because I had to say no to helping a woman who was trying to get off benzos. I don't know anything about that. She was doing it for like 3 months. I don't know. Does it take 3 months? And then I got that, really strong inspiration that I was probably not the person to be helping her, because I don't understand that, so I recommended that she talk to somebody who had that experience. I didn't want to think maybe she was making it up, but I started to get that feeling like if she was, I wouldn't know. I know if an alcoholic's lying to me, usually. I can usually, I think like that too, and then on tradition 4, many times, especially some of us who run around to all these online meetings, I'll hear somebody say something where they're speaking like they're an AA authority, or they're speaking for AA as a whole. There's a meeting that asks you not to use certain words in their meeting, or there are meetings who ask you not to use profanity. And I've had a lot of friends who say, I wonder, is that in any AA literature? Let's go look, let's go find out if it is. Because then we find out, no, each group is allowed to set those guidances, in their own group. And they absolutely are, but that's a 4th tradition issue. And that's a question I often will ask the people that know more than I do. Thank God we have access to those people, right? And I say, hey, is this an AA guidance from AA literature, or is this a 4th tradition issue? Because our group doesn't have limits on profanity. We're a newcomers group. We're just glad you're there. Say what, we're not putting a bunch of rules on people, but other people don't like that. They want to be a part of a group that does that, and that's perfectly fine. Let's see. Yeah, that's all I got on all that. Thanks, Bill. You want to read the next 6?
I want to say one thing about tradition 3 real quick. You brought up a good point. When it says we believe membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism, the secretary of my home group used to say on a regular basis, state asylums are filled with people who suffer from alcoholism who never took a drink. And I think that this thing is broad. Then it talks what the group is, though, is people who identify. And the reason I think it's so brilliant when it ought to include all who suffer, whether we know it or not, because it says in chapter 3, most of us have been unwilling to admit that we have the thing that qualifies us for membership, that thing called alcoholism. So they simplified it and said, guess what? All you got to have is a desire to stop drinking, which guess what? That implies that at one time you started drinking. If you never drank, you could suffer from alcoholism, but you got to go to another fellowship, probably Al-Anon if you were suffering at someone else's hands. So I just think it's brilliant the way the two are woven together. And of course, tradition 2 in the long form, and everyone says it's not like I'm a novice here, is shorter than the short form of tradition 2. It doesn't have the last, our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. Okay, tradition 7. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9, AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. Go ahead.
Well, 7 is we pay our own bills, right? That's a pretty simple, straightforward. We don't accept outside contributions from anyone that is not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, due to influence possibilities and stuff like that. 8, I love that. I never want me helping anyone else to depend on their ability to pay me. We got to keep that for fun and for free. Absolutely, 100%. And then, golly, I'm right on the border of having to wear readers all the time. Do you know what I mean? I recently learned, so on 9, I absolutely love, I didn't know this, but did you know that at central office in New York, they rotate into different positions every 6 months? How wild is that? I don't know if it directly relates to 9, but I love this. I wouldn't know how else to be, to tradition 9. We serve the purpose that we're given in a group. My group has different committees. They operate like committees. They're not necessarily called committees, but they each have a job, the attendance verification people, the people who do speaker recordings, and 10, 10 and 11 are the 2 that I probably run into the most in my daily AA life. Just gently reminding people that if an outside issue is an outside issue, because we're hanging out on AA campus and in our group, we also, our AA group has a WhatsApp chat where we also uphold the 12 traditions, and we continue to only talk about things that would draw, that don't divide us. We keep out anything that would divide us. And I will, really just gently remind someone that, that's a 10th tradition outside issue. If you could keep that outside, that sounds easier than it actually is in some cases. Back when they started back in the early days, they had a cross-dresser wanted to come to a meeting, and that was also related to tradition 3, of course. But I actually once had a talk with a man probably in his 60s who lived in the southern US about respecting another member's pronouns inside the meeting. How about that one? I felt like I had a relationship with him. I knew that a lot of people loved this man and looked up to him. He was 39 years sober. And so I felt that, again, an inspiration, like I think maybe I should say something to him. And I did. And you know what he said? He said, "Thank you. I will try to do better." I don't know what he thinks or believes outside the meeting, but I just reminded him that inside the meeting, I got to leave my stuff at the door. That's a very current issue for some people. And But that's an example of the sacrifice that we make to be part of something bigger and to support unity. You know, what are you willing to sacrifice? Sacrifice is written about a lot when you get into the traditions and start reading AA Comes of Age and all that. 11, you know, social media. AA's gotten clear on this. It's not a gray area anymore. Any audience that could include a non-AA member is considered public. Boom. That's it. It's that simple. That means, you know, I can say I'm sober, but I don't say I'm a member of AA. Put an AA token on my Facebook, you know, and I'm happy to provide the links to those brochures. There's 2 of them. One's called AA and the Internet, and the other one's called, I think, Anonymity and Social Media. I'd have to look. I haven't looked at it in a little while, but I keep those handy to let people know. I don't say my last name on recordings. If I know I'm being recorded, I don't say my last name. That's real clear. It's really clear in AA literature. It's not a gray area anymore. I don't know where that recording's going. Is it going to a password protected for alcoholics only website? If it's not, I need to not say my last name. That's all there is to it. If I do, why am I doing that? Why am I going against what AA suggests? And there we are, leading right into tradition 12, right? Am I trying to be somebody? You know, I mean, you know, it's interesting. You know, we put our names on these flyers and I get it. We have a lot of choices. And there are some messengers that speak more to me than others, you know. Do I go listen to certain speakers pretty much every time they speak? I do. Because they teach me and they speak to me, you know, they really do. But I think it's really important that person not, you know, their egos, they got to stay humble. And I can hear humility in people. I really can. I mean, I can hear when somebody's, you know, God, I mean, we've got some really wonderful speakers out there and they just stay so, I don't know. I'm just really grateful that it's not going to, you know, I mean, that's part of staying in recovery, right? What else do I want to say about that? Principles before personalities. That was one of the things that I watched change in my old group. And partly because some of the people involved didn't know the traditions yet. And I guess their sponsors weren't telling them about it. But, you know, they would make votes on personality over principle. And in some cases, that made the group really unsafe. There was like dishonesty and harm. And then those people just got, you know, nobody was required to make amends about anything or do anything. And it was unfortunate, you know, because I think that if you're in a position of responsibility in your group, you need to not be harming and lying to people. I mean, that's not cool. Like the group conscience should hopefully hold that accountable. I don't know. But principles, if I keep principles above everything, then it can guide me and to the right place. Because I think that when we live the principles, for me, my higher power removes obstacles and handles things. I don't know if it works that way for anyone else. But I find when I have the really purest intentions, you know, I love the 4 absolutes. I know they're not included in our literature. If you're curious about them, you can definitely look them up or someone can put a link. But, you know, keeping those in mind, when I try to act that way, then things work out, you know? Anyway, go ahead, Bill.
Absolutely. Very important. If you take a man's money, you take his thoughts. You guys have heard my story. I made a decision based on self to get into a relationship with someone who provided my support. And although I was the husband, I don't know if I was the head of the household or the man in the family. It seemed like the decisions that were being made are ones that I was going along with. Because when you're relying on someone else to support you, and what happens is I never found out who I was until that marriage ended. Because when you make a decision to get involved for anything but love in a relationship that requires, that might be one of the tenets. It usually doesn't end well. Forever non-professional, you don't have to worry about that with me. I got too many fellows to walk any professional lifestyle, so we'll move right on to tradition 9. Not be organized. That's a no-brainer. That almost comes automatically with some of us disorganized, which is great. And you see what happens at meetings. a lot. Like I said, I'm just referring to applying it to other relationships. But at the meeting, there's not a lot of organization. And Andrew made a point about the beginners meeting this morning, or it was Andrew or George that said it went kind of well. And it was a poop show. But the reality is we tried something new. We have the same people that, if we're not careful, will volunteer to read everything, which gives no newcomers an opportunity to start getting out of their little shell. So we asked, can we get a volunteer to read? And it was like a minute lull, and then no one had it, but we got through it. And 60 some people stayed on there. It was the first time that we did it. And it'll work itself out like everything else does, but we weren't organized. We didn't close the meeting down. It wasn't like, although I did receive something from a home group member that might be a little more rigid than others to say, oh my God, what happened? I said, we had an AA meeting. That's what happened. As long as I have no opinion on anything that's going on outside of myself, I don't have any problem. It's not even so much AA. Because if I have no opinion, then I don't have to give a voice to anything. So there's no gossip or criticism. My opinion gets me in trouble. And I'll tell you what, the three biggest defects of character, if God removed them, you'd be calling me Father William like Mother Teresa. Taking things personal, my opinion and my judgment, which may be the same thing. But as soon as I form an opinion or a judgment or take things personally, I get offended because I need to be right. And what happens is it puts a knot in my gut, and I'm at odds with you, and then I got to look for you to do things wrong so I can be right. And I'm right back there violating the first tradition and don't even know it. Fraction rather than promotion. Can I open my door? Can I live in a glass house? Can we live in a glass house so that you walk by and say, we want what they have over there? We want to live like them. Or, wow, that's a great concept. Why don't we try that and see how that works for us? And lastly, the only personality that the principals need to go before is my own. I thought it was all your twisted personalities. I said, that's an awful lot of personalities I got to place these principals ahead of. And my sponsor said, the only personality we're concerned with here is yours. If the principles go before your personality, the other 11 traditions will fall in place. And again, keeping in mind just how brilliant. I was at a Memorial Day breakfast that we have every year, a Memorial Day Mass for the deceased members of AA here in Ohio, everywhere, but it's something they do in Cleveland. And I remember I saw myself and the guy up there, he was the MC, which means he had the attention of 300 or 400 people just by default. But it seems like he was drawing more attention to himself as if there wasn't enough. And I saw myself in him. But I didn't get judgmental. I used it as a mirror. But it's almost like right behind him, Elizabeth, I could see a spirit hovering. And I said, isn't that amazing? God remains anonymous. He lets us take all the credit if we want it. And this thing still goes on. And you brought up something real important. It's the people who are placed in a position of celebrity status, and the fellowship does that when they start feeding. And that can be dangerous. It can be dangerous for the individual. Yes, we hear from them, and when God quits speaking through them, we know it. But do they know it that they were just a channel, like Bob B says? I'm the pipe, never the well. And guess what? Sometimes I fall in the well and think I'm the well. Enough for the 12 traditions from me.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Do we want to read the long form? Let me do the first 6. Wait, I can't hear you.
I think we covered it. I mean, that's if they want to get extensive in the tradition study, they can.
Sure.
That's up to you. I mean, most of them say the same thing, and some of them elaborate a little more on a corporate level. Whatever you want. I mean, it's not like next week we're not going to be here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff though. You can really get into a lot of things. But if you're interested in the traditions, definitely read AA Comes of Age. Our traditions, how they developed is another one. And I heard of one recently. Is it the language? No, what is it where Bill wrote articles about the traditions? Is it Language of the Heart? I just
No.
recently heard about it. I didn't even know. I see. I'm a lazy reader. I read if I need to or I want to, or if I want to or I
It's
have
covered a
to.
lot. But you know what? I'm gonna concur with you. Let's read them in the long form. There's a lot of, even if it's just a little extra line, like what it
Okay.
says in tradition one, what the member follows closely behind. But it's the group that's more important than the individual, although we tell the newcomer he's the most important person at that meeting, and he very well may be. But we're not going to acquiesce to him at the expense of the group, and that's critical. So yeah, let's do the long form.
All right. Our AA experience has taught us that one, each member of Alcoholics Anonymous is but a small part of a great whole. AA must continue to live or most of us will surely die. Hence our common welfare comes first, but individual welfare follows close afterward. Two, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Three, our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Hence we may refuse none who wish to recover. Nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. 4. With respect to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible to no other authority than its own conscience. But when its plans concern the welfare of neighboring groups also, those groups ought to be consulted. And no group, regional committee, or individual should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board. On such issues, our common welfare is paramount. 5. Each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6. Problems of money, property, and authority may easily divert us from our primary spiritual aim. We think, therefore, that any considerable property of genuine use to AA should be separately incorporated and managed, thus dividing the material from the spiritual. An AA group, as such, should never go into business. Secondary aids to AA, such as clubs or hospitals which require much property or administration, ought to be incorporated and so set apart that, if necessary, they can be freely discarded by the groups. Hence, such facilities ought not to use the AA name. Their management should be the sole responsibility of those people who financially support them. For clubs, AA managers are usually preferred, but hospitals, as well as other places of recuperation, ought to be well outside AA and medically supervised. While an AA group may cooperate with anyone, such cooperation ought never go so far as affiliation or endorsement, actual or implied. An AA group can bind itself to no one. Yep. You want to say something? Wait, where'd Bill go? Is he there?
I'm over here. Did you want to say something first?
I just, yeah, I do. I really like in a couple places, it talks about carrying its message to it emphasizes alcoholics. And I think that when we say anyone who has a desire to stop drinking, that can be dangerous. Now, and I'm a person who lived without a spiritual program for at least 14 years of sobriety. I got here early. It's that statement in the book that says, somebody who needed a spiritual, I don't know it by heart, but it says, for how much you need the spiritual program depends upon how much you've lost the power of choice and drink. I didn't really lose my power of choice. My ego told me I didn't want to stop, but I never actually tried to stop and found that I couldn't. I got here sooner than that. So I think but I know for sure that I'm an alcoholic and I need this program. I just didn't get into enough pain to need to develop a relationship with a higher power until well into sobriety. So coming from that end, I sometimes see people, I don't know, it just seems like they don't really need to work the program and they can, I don't know. I just have a feeling about, I worry about that sometimes. Like I don't know how to put it into words right now, but if you don't need AA, sometimes if you're hanging out in AA, but you don't need it, you can cause harm. I just think it's important. And in working with others and also in Two Employers on page 142, when we start working with somebody and we bend over backwards to help them if they show any effort, right? But if they're not, and they're just, they just want attention or they want something besides recovery from alcoholism, they can hurt a group. So I'm just going to say that. And I just like how it's emphasized a couple of extra times, you know, that, sorry, I think my husband forgot I'm doing this. A couple of extra times that, you know, we're talking about alcoholics here. You know, the primary purpose is really important for a reason. And then, again, that cooperate, not affiliate. You know, if I'm running around telling everybody they need to go to a certain treatment center, yeah. Now, is it good for me to know about some treatment centers? Yeah, it's helpful. You know, some people need that to be inpatient. I'm glad that someone told me about a place for my husband to go in 2022. You know, what if they hadn't told me? You know, I was hopeful for a place that used the big book and then got people into trauma therapy by, you know, at some point during the process, and that he would be there for a long time. Thank God someone told me, you know. What if we weren't allowed to tell each other stuff like that? Like, we got to have some kind of extra help sometimes. You know, we need that outside help to be out there. Okay, that's it for me.
Yeah, very good. And yeah, just a couple things. I already talked about that individual closely follows, but the group comes first. And I looked up the word entity. Maybe I knew what it meant or had an idea. And then, of course, Siri closed it. But I want to bring that up because it says to the effect that it exists independently on its own. So each group stands alone, although we are part of a great whole. And the important thing is, and this happens, I won't say that it happens on Zoom, although it may. There was a group, and I won't even name the county because there's no reason to disparage any region. That was one of the oldest, if not maybe the second oldest group in this particular county. And what happened is one person became attached to something. They had rented out a room at the church, and they had gotten so popular that they expanded to 2 or 3 rooms. It was very well attended. And up in the corner, someone noticed that there had been a crucifix. There had been there since the beginning of time. Maybe Moses put it there. And they wanted it taken down. But a couple of the home group members said, you know what? If it works, why fix it? We're not saying that anyone else has to do that. It's just a fixture like a lamp. And the people said, no problem. And down the road, there was a bar that was for sale. They bought the bar, made it more attractive because newcomers would rather hang out in a bar setting than a picture of Jesus hovering over you. And what happened is they set up the same format at the same time for the same meetings. And they almost made the oldest group or second oldest group in that area extinct. That's what the fourth tradition is designed to do, is to say, you know what? You can get an attitude and you can set up something if you don't like the way it's going. Although I listened to Billy Ann's brilliant on traditions. And he says he hears one thing that really miffs him is when he hears someone in a meeting say, all you need is a resentment, a coffee pot to start a new group. He said that may be the case, but all of a sudden you take people here and now we got to pay rent in 2 locations rather than money that could go to World Services to carry on the message of Alcoholics Anonymous in perpetuity for those to come. Instead of demonstrating that we can practice these principles and learn to get along even with the people that are hardest to get along with, me being the biggest one of all. And thank God that there's only one requirement for membership, and that you don't have to stay sober from your first meeting, although it's preferred and probably has a better outcome. They can't kick you out for anything. Now they can say, as Elizabeth said, we have a group conscience. And at this meeting, we ask that you refrain from this. If you make a mistake in the heat of the moment, it's accidental. I'm sure we can overlook your dereliction. But we can ask you to come back, not from this group. We probably can't make you not come back. But we could at least make you feel a little unwelcome here, but we can't ban you from Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's real important. Could you imagine if some of us got together and didn't like others of us, and we had to have we had the lion's share? No one would stand a chance. Of course, till someone got mad at me, and then I became part of the minority. But this thing's really, it's brilliant, saying, guess what? We're going to let God govern. healing takes place here. There's two authorities in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm told. One is King Alcohol, and the other is a loving God. One heals and one heals, according to one of our good friends, Mr. Arnowski.
You know,
He's
you bring up
passed, so yeah, he's
bring up
passed. So
something.
guess what?
Sorry. You
I
bring up
said he's
something.
passed. Oh, go ahead.
No, you bring up something so important. You know, as a sponsor, if your sponsor needs to teach you what AA is and what it isn't, because there are people kicking people out of meetings randomly online, especially. You know, I know firsthand of people doing this, and they need to know. And there's nobody out there policing these people at all. Like they're out there calling themselves an AA group, kicking people out. There was a group that was telling people you need to pay a minimum of $10 a month to do service in our group. Literally, like on their website. And you know, and people are reporting them to the online intergroup and telling them, and then they were given the chance to change it. And but it's important that we know what it is and what it isn't, so we can stand up for what it is. And every person here is allowed to do that and say, hey, now I've been told too that if it's not my group, it's not my business, but I can tell people that I sponsor, you know, what AA is, you know, and that's just, yeah, so that they can keep it safe too. And you know, I had somebody once say, Elizabeth, you know, this woman's telling me I have to get off my medication or she won't sponsor me. And she was brand new. She didn't know that this was not cool. I said, if you feel like that's against AA traditions, if you would like to go and tell her that you talked to me about this and use my name, and she's welcome to contact me. And I did. And you know what? That woman was really mad at me. But I said, I'm sorry, but AA is really clear on this. Now, if you don't want to sponsor someone on medication, you can say, I don't want to sponsor you. But don't act like an AA authority, like somebody needs to get off medication. That's not cool. So yeah, it's really so much about safety, keeping our people that want recovery safe. That's what these are, right? You know? That's it for me. Sorry to interrupt.
Absolutely. And this is not inherent to just in-person or physical locales. There's a particular meeting, there's several, there may be 4 that have the same format and they meet at the same time. So guess what? The illness transcends the internet. Social media does not preclude alcoholism from getting right into, it's like a virus in the computer, Elizabeth. All right, listen, we finished the first 6 traditions in both the long form. We will finish next week with the next 6. We've agreed that we are going to stop at 11:45. Excuse me, 12:45 our time, 11:45 Jesse's time, and 5:45 in the UK. At either rate, we're going to stop at this time and let you guys have the next half hour. And if anyone needs to stay on with any problems or communication, we'll stay on even till 1:30 and make it a 90-minute total. So I'm going to stop the recording now.